Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon, and we got a lot to get into. This was a fantastic weekend. It's championship weekend, one of my favorite weekends of the year, because everybody knows what it's going to take. You have to get a win. If you don't get a win, then that will be all she wrote in some cases. And some teams were going for a college football playoff bye. Some people were playing for their college football playoff lives. It was all completely different, but champions were crowned on Saturday night and one on Friday night. So we're going to discuss all of that right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Plus, your top 12 was officially released. Did the committee get it right? We'll discuss that and more. Before we do any of that, though, gotta welcome in my co-host, Dave Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing good, Garrett. We are here, man. Like, the field is set. The matchups are prepared. There were some outstanding games on championship weekend, worthy of championship games. And teams have played their way in or played their way out. Here we are.
Yep, here we are. Let's talk about this first one. The SEC championship, 22-19 in overtime. That's 9 overtimes that Georgia's now played in the last 2 weeks, but now they're going to get 4 weeks off. That's really the most important thing. But Georgia wins an SEC championship over Texas. And I have on the bottom right here, it says, and if you're listening on podcast, unfortunately, you can't read it, but I'll tell you anyway. Georgia tops Texas in SEC championship, but at what cost? Yeah, because Carson Beck is going to be on the shelf here for the foreseeable future. Based off of what I've been hearing in these reports, it could be a UCL injury, which if you are a baseball fan, that means Tommy John surgery. Not good. Really not good for the Georgia Bulldogs. But what is good is the fact that Gunnar Stockton comes into this game in the second half, and he gives them a spark. They scored 13 points in the second half of this game. And then, of course, you have the 6 in overtime. So, look, I don't know what the future holds for Gunnar Stockton as the starting quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs, but that's really where the conversation needs to start. That and the fact that the Georgia Bulldogs continue to not really play good football until the second half. It's been a worrisome trend for the Dogs here over the course of, the entire season, really. I think the number was 13 points per game on average in the first half. But the biggest thing is that they hold Texas out of the end zone. They only account for 6 points. This game was 6-3 going in at the half. And it felt like Texas was really in firm control of this game, especially given the fact that Carson Beck was injured at halftime, the last play before halftime. It was not looking good for the Dogs, but the defense continues to play at an elite level. They harassed Quinn Ewers, and I was very surprised that we didn't end up seeing any Arch Manning at all in this game because Quinn Ewers just didn't look super good at times, but he does end up with 358 yards and a touchdown. But that was really the only part of that offense that was working. The rushing attack dominated once more. If you account for sack yardage, 31 total yards on the ground. That is the reason they lost this game, because you flip flip to the other side, and it's the Georgia Bulldogs and Trevor Etienne. He goes for 94 yards and 2 tutties. This team is a lot better when Trevor Etienne is cooking. His 2 best games of the season come against Texas both times. So the last time they were in Austin, and then this time when they were in Atlanta. But Arian Smith, he leads the team in receiving. Wasn't really that kind of game, though. It was what they did on defense and what they did on the ground. They held them out of the end zone, and then look, Auburn misses 2 field goals that end up being a backbreaker for the Longhorns in this game. But credit to Kirby Smart. After everything that they've been through this season, for them to come out on top and win an SEC title is just almost storybook, the way that this season's gone for them.
Yeah, I mean, look, with respect to what Carson Beck did in the first meeting, this matchup and the way this thing played out was very similar. It was about the Georgia run game. It was about the Georgia defense pressuring the quarterback, and it was also about the Georgia defense limiting the Texas run game. All of those things happened once again in this game, and the Georgia offense didn't quite explode the way it did. They didn't necessarily get turnovers in the way that they did. But you mentioned it, and you and I were dead on, and we both agreed. If Travian Wisner doesn't get going in this game, it was just always going to be tough. In Texas, they got to be kicking themselves because they had opportunities to bury Georgia early on, and they didn't do it. And it was one of those things, and I sent out a tweet, and I don't remember the specifics, but it was certainly around the idea of like, you had an opportunity to put this team down. You didn't do it. And how many times this year have we seen Georgia come out as a different squad in the second half. Quite literally a different squad this time because it was Gunnar Stockton and not Carson Beck.
Mm-hmm.
But just in general. And the other thing that we saw in the first game, right, where Georgia goes into Austin and wins 30-15, you see it again, 22-19. The return of Trevor Etienne was huge for the Georgia offense. There were questions about his ribs, questions about how much he would play. There's been questions all season, quite frankly, about how good he's been. And look, he was under 100 yards, but 2 touchdowns in this one. He led the team in rushing. Second leading receiver. Just a huge game for a team that was desperate to find some offense, especially in the second half after Gunnar Stockton came in. And Gunnar was red hot on the first drive, and they trusted him. Then they kind of closed the offense up. I don't know why. But late in this game, Trevor Etienne took it under himself to find the game winner in overtime, but also carry through. And just very impressive for Georgia again to be able to do what they did. Again, the defense was a terror. 6 sacks again, and we talked about it. What is Texas going to do to adjust? Surely Georgia can't impact the quarterback again, can they? Yes, apparently they can. And look, it led to 2 interceptions. It also led to a lost fumble. So Georgia does get 3 turnovers forced, and they go from there. It was one of those things, Garrett, where you watch this game and you're like, yeah, I think I could see Georgia winning the national championship. And that's not new. Like it's not something we didn't know. But I think you could see that. And quite frankly, I was impressed with Texas. I think there were opportunities again to have put this game away. But to battle back and deal with what they dealt with and take Georgia to the brink, very impressive showing, albeit in a losing effort. But Georgia gets the win. Georgia gets the bye. Georgia gets much needed time off, which you and I will talk about as well, because if the injuries are true, they've got to get Gunnar Stockton ready. And that extra week, that extra week is going to be absolutely massive, absolutely huge in getting him prepared. So it was very important, even more so than we knew at the time, that they got the bye, have extra time to prepare, because they might be doing it with a quarterback that is not as experienced as you would like.
Yeah, and look, you talk a little bit about this defense specifically. I mentioned it. You mentioned it. 15 TFLs in a game is nuts. 15 TFLs against UMass would be nuts. That's a good number for that, much less doing it in an SEC title game against Texas. Look, this is a game that when we were coming into this game, I remember we sat here on this podcast. We talked about it on Saturday morning on College Football Game Time on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. Look, I said specifically, it's like, you need to be able to make that first tackle if you are Kirby Smart in this defense, right? That's where Georgia was able to cause some problems. And Georgia, they'd struggled with that in recent weeks against Georgia Tech, against UMass specifically. They had and then at various points throughout the season, they weren't tackling super well. And it's just in the 2 times that they played Texas, they were. And it's where that first guy makes the tackle. And that's why you have so many TFLs. I mean, because that's what Sark's offense kind of relies a lot on, is slipping that one guy into coverage, and then he gets a one-on-one situation, and then he slips a tackle, and then all of a sudden he's housing it. And you saw Texas had an opportunity. They had one of those plays on that 41-yard touchdown pass in the second half. That's at that moment when they tied it up at 13. They slip into space, and that you have those one-on-one matchups. It's just the problem was for this offense. For Texas's offense, is that they couldn't consistently get wins on those plays. Georgia was winning those one-on-ones too often. Georgia was dominating that. And then but that's where I get back into this. It's like they needed to run the ball better. They had to run the ball better if they wanted to have a chance in this game. I mean, we talked about how they were 1.1 yards per carry the first time that these two teams saw each other. And then on Saturday, it really wasn't much better. And that's where I thought we were going to see Arch Manning. I was a little surprised that we didn't see any packages or anything like that to kind of pull him in. I'm not saying that Quinn Ewers should have been benched or anything like that, but I am saying that you needed a spark on offense. You needed to cause some stress for the Georgia Bulldogs at some level, and they weren't really stressing them in the rushing attack. They had a couple of chunk plays at times, specifically in the passing game, but outside of that, this Georgia defense just locked down. And the story's going to stay Gunnar Stockton. People are going to talk about Gunnar Stockton and the way that he was able to not have the moment be too big for him. And he stepped in and had a great performance in this game. And look, credit to him. He deserves a lot of credit in this. But it's really the Georgia defense. And if the Georgia defense plays like that, I think they should be the favorite to win the national championship, period. If they play like they did against Texas, if they play the way they did, like they did against Clemson earlier in the season, if they play the way they did against Tennessee in the second half, that team is unbeatable by anybody else in college football. Oregon, I could give that a potential, that would be a really good football game. The number 1 and number 2 team in America. But they may not even see each other in a national championship game. We'll talk about that when we get into our college football playoff bracket reveal. But this was a great game. They go into overtime, and I had so much fun watching this game. I was at a wedding, full disclosure to everybody, and bless my friends. I love them very much, but I'm sitting over there in the corner, hiding behind a Christmas tree, trying to follow this game and watch everything. And I was that guy at the wedding, and I am completely and totally unashamed about it. But Texas Longhorns they have a great season. They're still in the college football playoff, but we'll discuss that here in just a little bit. Abe, any more thoughts on this one?
No, I just think it was an outstanding SEC title game, and I guess I want to ask you something. You mentioned. I hope you don't mind me bringing this.
No, what you got?
Bringing this up. It was something you had said off air. I didn't know if you wanted to avoid the discussion, but I think you had said you weren't really sure about the atmosphere, the environment. Did it have the feel of a big game that, say, Alabama and Georgia in previous years in the SEC title game felt? As this game got going, and I know you were limited in how you were able to view it, did it start to feel that way for you? Did it feel like a big-time matchup?
Yeah, I mean, it was because it is a big-time matchup between two really good football teams, and that's always going to carry some weight. And when I said that, I was more referencing, the stakes are so massive when Alabama and Georgia would play each other, or when Georgia played Auburn back in 2017, where you have two teams who have an opportunity to make a play for a college football playoff. And that's what it's been for such a long time, where the winner of that game is going to go to the CFP and the loser likely is not. In some cases, they did.
Let me address that. Let me address that, because I agree with you. The stakes are slightly different, but it didn't feel like Texas had the mindset of, oh, well, we're still in it.
No.
Winning the SEC title this was a brutal defeat emotionally and mentally for this Texas team, and that's also the challenge that they're going to have, and SMU is going to have, and Penn State, like the teams that lost their conference title game and are still in the playoffs. They have got to deal with the mental aspect of this, because they've got to get going again too. They don't have the week off. Now they do have a week off, but the extra week off.
I know what you mean.
And so they're going to have to deal with coming off of tough losses, mental letdowns, and get ramped back up. The good news is for those teams, Texas and Penn State, at least, not SMU, they will be at home. That'll give them a benefit.
Yeah. I think ultimately this is the SEC championship. This is the conference that means more. That's what they say. It's the moniker of the conference. And I think it's clear that whenever the SEC championship is played, people from everywhere else in the country turn and watch, because the game means so much. It always does. And I think that is never going to be lost. Hopefully, I hope and pray that its significance is never lost. And I was worried that it was heading into this game, where you have head coaches in the conference who had never won an SEC title, mind you, coming out and say how they don't want to play in the game. That's where I started getting a little concerned about the importance of this game and the atmosphere of this game and everything else. And then you see the ticket sales. I don't know what they ended up being, but I know that it wasn't exactly a full house. It didn't look like it wasn't a normal SEC title game in that sense, where everybody shells out $750+, which is a ludicrous sum of money to go watch a football game. But tickets had dropped to, I don't know, like $90, $100 or something like that by the time the ball was kicked off. That's not normal for an SEC championship game. Generally speaking, that's go way up. So in that instance, in that sense, yeah, I do think it was lessened, and I do think that the stakes were lower. But at the end of the day, though, it is still a crippling loss for Texas. It's still a loss that's going to hurt a lot, especially if they end up seeing each other for a second time in the college football playoff. I wonder if they're going to be able to get up off the mat to beat them, because once you've beaten a team twice, it looks like Georgia kind of snatched their soul at times. But I mean, Texas kept fighting. They stayed in this game. Credit to Sark. He had a good game. He had a fine game plan. It's just I think that a couple of things could have gone their way, but you can't get penalized like that. You can't turn the ball over like that, and you can't let your quarterback get hit like that and expect to win a lot of football games. But let's move into the Big Ten Conference because this was I actually don't even have it on. Well, there it is. Beautiful. Oregon. They toppled Penn State to win the Big Ten championship. Final score 45-37. James Franklin is and will continue to be the story because fair or not, he is known as a big game joker. Even though I don't think they choked this game, I just think that Oregon was a better football team, and that's not it's just sort of reality for James Franklin and Penn State. Everyone likes to talk about how they're overrated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Josh Pate actually says this on his podcast, and I would encourage you to go check that out. He does a very good job. He says the obvious answer to that, to whatever somebody says, somebody who's overrated, you say, well, what are they rated? You talk about how they're 1-13 against top 5 teams. They were underdogs likely in every single one of those games. He's now 1-14 against those top 5 teams. You would think that eventually it would just sort of work in his direction. But Penn State, it sets up pretty nicely for them where Ohio State falls and they are kind of backdoor their way into a conference championship game. And I will give them full credit for this. They continue to fight and fight and fight. I thought there was a very real chance that Oregon had a chance to really run away with this game. And it looked like that's what was going to happen. I think they were up to 28-10 or something at one point. And I mean, full credit to Drew Aller in this offense. They kept fighting and they did the thing that we wanted them so desperately to do, running the damn ball. And it's Katrin Allen and Nick Singleton. They rushed for 200 yards on their own. And doing that against this Oregon front, it does give me some pause for Oregon moving into the college football playoff. Maybe that's something that they have to address because the two best teams who can run the football ran the ball really, really well against them. And they both surpassed 200 yards on the ground. Penn State nearly goes for 300 in this game, but points on points on points in this game in the Big Ten championship game. Oregon, they win the Big Ten title.
Well, let me start with Penn State. And I know that Drew Aller did throw 2 interceptions, but like, in general, I don't know if they can play a better offensive game. They got the ball to Warren. They had the run game going with both running backs, which we haven't seen over the course of the season. And the defense is a different issue. I completely agree, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I don't know if they can play better offensively. Again, cut down on the interceptions, and obviously that's one way, but they had a lot of things working. It was very impressive. I actually came away being more impressed with Penn State than I was when we went into this game. And I'll just be honest, and I know the matchup is set now. Before I even knew the matchup, I was like, Penn State's going to end their season with 2 straight losses. Like, I was very confident they were not going to beat Oregon, and I was immediately also thinking, like, and they're probably going to lose their home game in the playoffs. I don't necessarily feel that way anymore. I'm going to have to dig into the matchup and see. They were very impressive in a losing effort. So with that said, defensively, obviously, it was a real issue. They've got to find a way to be better. Now, Oregon's offense, they're number 1 in the country as a team for a reason. Tez Johnson has been slow to get going coming back from his injury. Not slow to get going in this game. He was an absolute monster, an absolute beast. 181 yards, a touchdown, 11 catches, and Dylan Gabriel just continued to find him. Gabriel was smart, protected the ball for the most part, and this Oregon team is capable of winning a national championship. I do think there were moments where they had a chance to put this game away and were unable to do so either offensively or to get a stop defensively, and they kind of kept Penn State in it a little bit. But, man, this is a really good Oregon team with a really good offense. It's going to give them a chance against pretty much everyone. I think defensively for Oregon, the biggest issue was the front. I think Penn State handled the Oregon front very, very well. They moved them around when they were trying to run the ball. They protected Drew Aller for the most part when they were trying to pass the ball. 1 sack for Oregon, only 2 tackles for loss. That's not good enough when you're going to be going against an offensive line potentially like Georgia, potentially like Ohio State. And I know we've seen that game before, but you get the point. I thought that was a letdown from Oregon's perspective, but Penn State is very impressive in a losing effort in this one. I'm interested to see. How both of these teams show up in the playoffs.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, look, these are some fireworks. This is not exactly what I was expecting this game was going to be. I thought the under was a great play in this game. I didn't publicly say that, and thank God I didn't, even though I guess I just outed myself on it. But you know what? I mean, look, I thought that this was a game that if Penn State was going to win it, it was going to have to be a low-scoring game. And I mean that relatively. I mean, like, I thought this game was going to have to get into the 20s and kind of live in the 20s. And you said it, I said it. It's the fact that the offense looked the way that it did for Penn State. That gives me confidence too. Just like you, Abe. I think that this is a Penn State squad that if they play like that on offense specifically, then they give themselves a chance to win. And it's because your beasts step up, like I mentioned, the running backs, but it's also the fact that Tyler Warren gets involved in this game. And then the rest of your wide receivers also step up and have a pretty solid game themselves. I mean, you have 3 different guys who have 4+ catches. You have 4 different guys who have 3+ catches. And then you have I mean, of course, Tyler Warren is going to be the guy. He is your dude on offense, but he can't be the only guy who steps up in these big spots. It does give me a little bit of confidence moving into the college football playoff, and I think it's going to be good for them moving forward. For Oregon, it's tough when you've got Dillon Gabriel playing like that. Dillon Gabriel, that's a special guy. You know, he's somebody who I think somebody said it was like 66 is the number. I'm pretty sure that's what the number is. I just haven't seen the physical number written down anywhere. But he's played in a lot of football games, and it's very clear that he is very comfortable in the pocket. And he's just a wheeler and dealer when he's back there. And it's so much fun to watch this Oregon team play football and offense, especially when you get going with guys like Tez Johnson. Tez Johnson, when he's at his best, this offense clicks at a higher level. And you mentioned his injury. Yeah, he's been kind of banged up here as of late. When he is healthy and playing good football, that is a really, really fun offense to watch. And we know what Jordan James is. We know what Dillon Gabriel is. I mean, this group is going to be very difficult to beat. But the draw that they have is so fascinating for the college football playoff. And again, like I mentioned, we'll talk about that here in a second. And I'm just champing at the bit, trying to get to talking about that conversation. But no, look. Big game here from Oregon, and Penn State continues to fall in these big time opportunities. I don't blame James Franklin. I think they got what they wanted to see out of the offense, and that should give them some confidence moving into the college football playoff. But Abe, any more thoughts on this one before we move on?
No, again, just to repeat, likewise, I was impressed with Texas in their losing effort. I think they answered some questions. I think Penn State did too. And we can talk about the strength of schedule for Texas. You can talk about the strength of schedule for Penn State. I think I've seen enough, man. They took Ohio State to the brink, and I think they pushed Oregon in a manner of which I think there's no more questions, at least for me, about whether or not they're one of the 12 best teams.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move into the Mountain West Conference, because this was a game that I felt was going to be very important. And it is very important because the winner of this one was going to get an opportunity to play in a college football playoff. And Boise State, they get the win. They run past UNLV to win the Mountain West Conference 21-7. And I say run past because it's Ashton Jeanty. Put the ball in his chest and just sort of go. They score all 21 points in the first half of this game. UNLV comes back in the fourth quarter, makes it a little bit less lopsided. I guess it's a 14-point affair. That is the difference here. But look, I think the biggest difference here for Boise State is Ashton Jeanty. That much is obvious. It's been obvious throughout the entirety of the season. But Maddox Madsen, I mean, when he's able to stay ahead of the chain to just complete passes at a high level, and he can just kind of keep this offense in rhythm, and, you know, like kind of keep an extra guy outside of the box so they can't just put up an eight-man box against Ashton Jeanty, then this offense just plays a lot better. I didn't like what I saw in the second half, how this team just sort of I think they took their foot off the gas just a little bit. I didn't like that too much, but they were just sort of like leaning on the football, trying to take the air out of the ball. and time off the clock. And I get it. You just want to get through to the end and just finish it out on top. But credit to Boise State. They were able to get enough done. Ashton Jeanty, man, it's a brutal draw that he's in a season. He's matched up with Travis Hunter for a Heisman Trophy. It's just so unfortunate for him. I don't know if he's going to have enough when it's all said and done, but this guy he's very close to Barry Sanders' all-time rushing record. I think he may end up breaking it. I think he's got to go for 187 yards or 140 yards or something like that in their first round playoff game, whoever they end up playing. But if he gets to that, then credit to him. But it may be too little too late. But one more 200-yard effort here for Ashton Jeanty. He just continues to churn out yards, and Boise State, they run away with a Mountain West championship.
Well, look, you talked about their offense. Give me a moment to talk about their defense then. And you're absolutely right, by the way, about Jeanty and Madsen, who played a very smart, clean game. The biggest question I had on defense is how are they going to handle Malik Williams' legs? I knew Malik Williams wasn't going to beat them, the UNLV quarterback, likely through the air in 110 yards passing. The biggest question, though, is what is he going to do on the ground? 21 times he ran the ball, only 56 yards. I cannot understate how impressive a performance it was to slow him down. Now, they did let Kylan James go on one big run, an 86-yarder, but they tackled him in the red zone and then held on downs. So the defense, you add to that 6 sacks, 11 tackles for loss in this game. A lot of focus is going to be on Jeanty, and rightfully so, but this defense was ramped up as well. Very impressive performance.
Yeah, it's the first time that they've been held below. UNLV has been held below 23 points in a game this season. And it, like you mentioned, it starts with the quarterback. He is able to run and move and do a lot of things in the pocket. Boise State, they're going to be playing in the college football playoff. Another game that was sort of a de facto playoff game, Arizona State and Iowa State. It's Arizona State. It was always Arizona State. It was them from the beginning. Even if they were picked to finish last of the Big 12 conference in their first year in the conference, they're now champions. 45-19, Iowa State, who hasn't won a conference championship since World War I. Before World War I. I think it was like 1912. I think that was the number. That's a really long time. But unfortunately for them, they're going to have to wait just a little bit longer. Because, look, Arizona State, what they're able to do at the running back position with Cam Scatterbo, man, that man is such a joy to watch play football. There are some people who you see them just sort of stand around or look, you just look at him and you're like, that's a football player. That's Cam Scatterbo. He said as much after the game. He said he's the best running back in America. I'm sure Ashton Jeanty will have something to say about that. But Scatterbo did what he had to do in this game, and he goes for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also does it with his arms or his hands as well. So arms, I guess. 2 receptions, 38 yards, and a touchdown for Cam Scatterbo. We wanted to talk about what this team was going to look like without Tyson in the game. Scatterbo answered that question very quickly, and we answered. That's effectively what we asked them to do. Just run. And that's what they did. They go for 248 yards on the ground. And Sam, leave it. He just dude does what he needs to do, and you had some other guys step up here in the passing game. And he plays a clean game. He goes 12-17, 219 yards and 3 tutties. But this was a game that Arizona State laid the wood, and they go up 24-10 and then 21 points in the third quarter. Rocco Beck starts turning the ball over a little bit. And it was at that point that, this game sort of went off the rails. Sama, he ends up putting the ball on the ground, the running back, twice, and they lose the ball twice. And it was the turnovers that were really the backbreaker for Iowa State. But I just want to give full credit to Arizona State because that offense continued to churn, and it gives me some real confidence in this team moving forward into the college football playoff. We talked about Arizona. We talked about LSU, teams like that last year who they didn't have a resume that was good enough to get them into a top 4, but nobody wanted to play them, right? They were one of those teams who just playing their best ball down the stretch at the end of the season. But that's what Scatterbo is. That's what this Arizona State team is. They're playing their best football right now. They're a joy to watch, and they win the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, you talked about the forced turnovers. I was going to bring that up. I think that obviously played its way in terms of the scoreline, it being a comfortable blowout. But Arizona State's offense was rocking, and we knew Scatterbo was going to be going after it. But how about Stovall And Guillory stepping up with Tyson out. 91 yards for Stovall, 2 touchdowns for Guillory. And then I texted you midway through this game, and I know the numbers aren't crazy. The totals aren't crazy, but I said, man, has Levitt really used his legs in this manner all season? It was another aspect to this offense that maybe I hadn't been paying close enough attention, and shame on me, but it's just something else that teams are going to have to deal with and prepare for. The only thing I would say is concerning about Arizona State is it almost feels like you don't want the bye. They got a bye, and are gonna, but like the way that they're playing, you'd almost be like, man, we don't want to lose any of the momentum that we've got right now. That's how good they've been trending upwards, but they're going to have to take the extra week and deal with that aspect of showing up when the time is right. But I mean, they are playing incredibly high level. They've got a guy in Scatabo that you game plan for. You know that's the guy to stop, and it just doesn't matter. And look, I think Penn State has one of those guys too, and Tyler Warren, and certainly Tez Johnson. I imagine Penn State game plan for him, but he still went nuts. There's some of these guys that are going to be in the playoffs. Ashton Genty certainly. But Scatabo is as tough to stop as anyone. So Arizona State is rolling. It was nice to see the performance without Tyson. That was the only question I had. I thought they're the better team. You still didn't know it until you saw it. Now that we've seen it, they are going to be a tough out.
Who wins the Coach of the Year this year?
Yeah, I mean,
honest question. You weren't right. You didn't know I was asking that question.
No,
I come out of nowhere with it.
I understand why you're asking it now. In my opinion, if SMU had beaten Clemson, I think Rhett Lashley probably deserved it. With SMU losing to Clemson, I probably give it, and you can say what you want about the record and the schedule and the opponents. I'd probably give it to Curt Cignetti. Look, Arizona State was picked to finish dead last in the Big 12. I don't think it's really a good call to use like preseason predictions to like prove whether a coach did a great job or not. I know Indiana wasn't expected to be all that great either. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think the 3 guys who are in the discussion, Dillingham, Cignetti, and Rhett Lashley, all have their teams in the playoff. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's the nuts thing about this season. That's why I asked you the question though, because I don't think there's a perfect answer. I really don't. I think that there are great cases for all 3 of them. I mean, I think Rhett Lashley, unfortunately, because he didn't win, I'm going Dillingham, just because they were predicted to finish as low as they did, and they won the Big 12 championship. They're the only team that won a conference championship of those 3. Curt Cignetti is a great option. Rhett Lashley is a great option. But Dillingham is somebody who I think is going to end up winning this award. And it's the fact that they just continue to find ways to win games. They went 11-1 without their starting quarterback. And I think that's something that you've got to talk about too, because this dude's a freshman. Levitt's a freshman. And they were able to do what they did with him and then you go and play without his favorite target in the conference championship game. Just a tremendous effort, tremendous game there from Arizona State. This game was over about halfway through the third quarter, and then it was just all she wrote. And everyone was looking forward to the Georgia-Texas game at that point. But great game from them. They're going to go to the college football playoff for the first time. Our last conference championship game was one that was going to be the source of a lot of drama. It was going to be one that was going to be very important because there was another team on the outside looking in who at the time was in the dance. And that's the Alabama Crimson Tide. We'll talk about them here in just a second. But it's Clemson who shocks SMU at the buzzer. Looked like SMU was going to storm that huge, incredible, improbable comeback where Clemson jumps out to an early lead in this game and SMU ties it up at the very end of the game. And Clemson, they come back and they kick a field goal to stun SMU 34-31. They win their 9th conference championship and their 8th conference championship in the last 10 years. Just an impressive feat here from Dabo Swinney and company. They just continue to dominate the ACC. This is a big game team, and like when they get to this game up in Charlotte, they are very comfortable up there. SMU clearly was a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, like this is a game that you'd go up 24-7 at one point, and credit to SMU for the way that they were able to come storming back into this game. But I mean, at the end of the day, Phil Maffa is dealing with a couple of injuries, and that was pretty apparent here in this game. He only goes for 28 yards. Didn't go the way that I thought it would for that rushing attack. It's Cade Klubnik who comes in with Bryant Westco. He has 2 touchdowns at 143 yards for the true freshman wide receiver in this game. But Brashard Smith, he does everything he can. Kevin Jennings, he does everything he can. I mean, Roderick Daniels. I mean, like this is a group that they fought their tails off in this game, and the way that they were able to come storming back, I thought was extremely impressive. And I had them in the college football playoff, despite the loss. And I mean, just a great win from Dabo Swinney and this Clemson team, who just refuses to go away. It was a statement opportunity. It was a nail in the coffin type opportunity as well. And they made the statement instead, and they win another ACC championship.
Well, look, you're just not going to win this sort of game if you shoot yourself in the foot this many times early in the game. You start with a fumble, they score. You punt, you allow a huge return, plus 15-yard penalty, they score. And you answer back, but then they score. There's an interception. You trade missed field goals. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't clean enough for a team in SMU that I think has been relatively good at that the majority of the season. They just were way too sluggish getting going. And it was an important comeback too, because I don't think we're having the discussion we're going to have in a little bit about the committee's decision if they don't make this a ball game. But kudos to Clemson, and we talked about it. Like the range of emotions a week ago. In my opinion, they were it's set for an at-large bid if they beat South Carolina. They lose that game, the season's over, and then all of a sudden Miami falls to Syracuse. You're in the ACC title game, and you got an opportunity to play your way in, and you did with a 50-plus yard field goal to boot at the end to avoid overtime and potentially have a different ending to this thing. Dabo had his guys up for this game. They have not always looked like that, especially on defense, the entire course of this season. And so very impressive for Clemson to rally after a bad loss on the last day of the regular season, find their way and play their way in. I don't know how good they are. Like I really don't. You could tell me that they're going to go on the road and win, and I'd believe you, or you could tell me that they we're lucky to have a spot. They get embarrassed in the first round. I'd believe you. Like I really don't know what to expect from them in the next round. I think that makes it incredibly interesting, but very nice win for Clemson.
Yeah, really. And look, Clemson needed this game. They needed to get, I mean, look, for multiple reasons. I mean, I talked about how, this is a win or go home type of situation for the Tigers, and good for the ACC because this actually opened the door for two teams to make the playoff. But I mean, this was an interesting game, and we were texting about this one when it was coming up to like around the fourth quarter, and you said, can SMU win this game? And I said, well, Clemson can certainly choke it, right? I mean, this was a game that it felt like that's what was going to happen, and then it did happen, and then it didn't. All of a sudden, it was just the swings of emotions for the Clemson Tigers this season have been really unbelievable, and it's the ups and downs of the things that they've gone through. And that this is the first big win that they've had over a ranked opponent this season, where they've actually showed up and played a good game against a team that they potentially had a chance to lose to, throughout the course of the season, like you have the game against South Carolina, you had the game against Louisville, you had the game against Georgia, where you got mollywopped in two of those games and you lost what really amounted to a heartbreaker at home against South Carolina. I mean, I needed to see Clemson step up in a big game, and they did against a comparable opponent. And it was just a fantastic performance from Clemson in the first half. It wasn't so great here in the second half, where they kind of let things falter. And that's where I get I have some pause for really either of these teams. SMU, I feel like reset and found themselves there in the second half. And that has a lot to do with the way Kevin Jennings was playing the game. That dude is just electric with the football in his hands. He can do a lot of different things. He had 35 yards in the touchdown on the ground. He also had the 3 touchdowns through the air. He's a fun watch. And I think that SMU is going to be a pesky little team. Clemson, I'm a little bit more concerned. I know they end up winning this game, but I'm just still not completely sold, especially if Phil Maffa can't get that shoulder right. I think that this offense is limited in what it can eventually do. Cade Klubnik, of course, plays out of his mind in this game, but to see that consistently, I think that's going to be important for them if they want to advance in this college football playoff. But huge win for Clemson, huge win for the ACC as well. Because let's get into our discussion. Why don't we?
Well,
Did you have
real
anything else
quick,
you
let
wanted
me
to
just
say?
say one
Go
more
ahead.
thing about SMU. This was not their normal performance, and I know I'm not even making the case for them to be in over Alabama, whatever. They were massively let down by special teams in this game. I talked about the punt return and the issues there on the second drive. We talked about a missed field goal briefly. But probably even worse than those two, if we're going to be quite honest here, Garrett, a 41-yard kickoff return when you tie this game up with 16 seconds.
Yep.
And that's the only reason Clemson's anywhere close to field goal range with the ball in their hands, trying to move it a little bit further up the field. Just a massive letdown in the first half and a massive letdown at the very end of the game in special teams cost SMU the win here.
Yeah. Well, did it also cost them a chance at a college football playoff? Well, we found out 12 o'clock today. Well, really like 12:30. It took them
40, yeah.
It took them a freaking eternity. I was actually really, really happy about it because then I was like, all right, perfect. I'll find out pretty quickly. Then we can transition into the NFL and have our 1 o'clock games be ready to go. Not so fast, my friend. They just took their sweet time just revealing everything. And look, they had all the graphics done and everything was ready. Just show us the damn graphic. Well, we got it eventually. So how do you want me to do this? Do you want me to go through and do you just want to dive right into the SMU versus Alabama, or do you want me to go through and set up the matchups?
We don't need to discuss the rest. I mean, we can run through the matchups in a moment, but the only real decision that had to be made was who was the last at-large team. Clemson was always going to be seated where they were as the last team in conference champ. I think Boise State was always going to be the 3 seed with Arizona State the 4. And the seedings all made sense. They very clearly did not penalize, and this is going to relate to SMU as it did to others. They really did not penalize teams that lost in the conference championship. Texas loses, they're still a host. Penn State loses, they're still a host. SMU loses, they still get in. So there are some themes going on from that perspective.
Yep.
But I will say this. You asked the question here on the graphic. Did they get it right? There was no right or wrong. There was just your own preference. I don't think there is any way. And look, people who are Alabama fans are going to scream and yell at me and say, no, we're the better team. And if you feel that way, I have no problem with you feeling that way. But it doesn't make you right, and it doesn't make me wrong, nor does the other way. It is just a complete preference. And I had some people send me a message yesterday. It was like, well, if these two teams met, who would you pick, Alabama or SMU? I was like, well, I would have picked Alabama over Oklahoma too, man. And they got obliterated. Like just because that's just such a tough sell. Who do you think would win the game? Like that's just not it. And you want to sell to me the wins that Alabama has had. Sure, absolutely. They have better wins than SMU. SMU has better losses. They have better losses. And so you try and quantify different things. And ultimately where you lead is what is your preference? And I think at the end of the day, my personal preference was to keep SMU in for a couple of reasons. Most specifically, I did not think they deserved to be penalized or punished for playing and losing this extra game. That was really the biggest discussion to me in regards to between these two teams. Like, I don't even need to look at the resume. Like it's not such a bad loss to Clemson that you couldn't. And look, that was the other thing that was interesting. We were trending towards it possibly being that, right? It's 21-7 and Clemson's got the ball with a chance to kick a field goal. And you're like, man, like SMU might be playing their way out. They fought their way back, nearly got it to overtime. And I think that's partly a big reason why. But I say a lot to answer your question with like a non-committal statement is that There was no right. There was no wrong. It's only which team you preferred for whatever reason you would like it to be. And you can defend a lot of different takes on this. You can defend strength of schedule. You can defend the conference. You can defend not penalizing teams in conference championships. You can defend better losses, worse losses, better wins, worse. You can defend any either of these two teams any which way you want. And that just further goes to show it was a complete preference. Now, I will say this, because I almost tweeted this out before the committee made their announcement.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't feel this way. Maybe they weren't thinking with enough foresight for this anyways.
I don't think they have foresight, first off.
I don't either. I also think they just do whatever they want in general.
Yeah, pretty much.
They were, whatever the decision was today, sets a precedent.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't know which precedent they were going to set. But penalizing SMU is a bad precedent. It may have been for the right reasons, for the right intentions with Alabama and the better wins, and I get that. Tougher schedule, sure. It may have been well-intentioned, but it would have been a really bad precedent to set. So, again, not trying to hate on Alabama. None of these teams are perfect or infallible. I'm glad they did it this way for a number of reasons, but most specifically, the precedent of not penalizing teams who lose in your conference championship game. Although the asterisk, I think, you are losing to a team that was in the top 20. It's not an unranked bum that came and got you. This was a good Clemson team that got you. So I think it was the right decision. But that, again, just my preference.
Yeah. Well, I say, did they get it right? And the answer is absolutely they got it right. I think I picked the exact thing. So if you go check it out, GChap ATL, I tweeted this out late last night, and I was right. So, yeah, of course they got it right because it's what I predicted. But no, I kid. But look, SMU over Alabama was the correct decision, and it's the correct decision for the one reason, and you said it. Conference championship games are very important to college football, at least over the last 30 some odd years since they were instituted league-wide. And it's a very important thing for the committee to maintain the relevancy of a college football playoff and a conference championship game. That was something that was extremely important to them when they were going and expanding in the first place. You can't then turn around and penalize a team for a loss potentially in the in their conference championship game, period. And they did that, right? They did a good job of not penalizing those teams. None of those teams really saw anything significant happen to them outside of, SMU drops, and of course they are the 11th seed in this game or in this tournament, but look, they don't drop really all that far. And it's just because they had to drop a little bit below Clemson and whatever. You had to make it all work. And you have to build space for the teams who are going to go up in front of you. They end up in here as the 11th seed. But look, ultimately, they did get the right decision. And you can talk about strength of schedule and all their big wins and everything else. But Alabama lost to two teams that they should not lose to. The loss to Tennessee is one thing. That's fine. You can talk about their win over Georgia. You can talk about their win over LSU on the road. You can talk about what they did to Missouri. That's fine. But the fact that everybody is sitting here on social media and on Twitter, and I was a little bit more active with people than I normally am, just sort of calling out all these Alabama fans who were a little ridiculous in some of their comments and saying like, oh, well, now you're going to disincentivize all of these non-conference games and everything. You played Mercer in your out-of-conference schedule. Let's not sit here and talk about Alabama as if they were sitting there playing Notre Dame, as if they're playing, I don't know, they're playing SMU or they're playing USC or any of these other big programs. They were playing smaller programs in their out-of-conference schedule. They lost games to 6-6 SEC opponents. That's inexcusable. You do one of those things, fine. It's a bad week. Maybe your quarterback is not playing well or he gets hurt or something else. Some weird things happen in college football. But you lost by 3 touchdowns to Boomer Sooner, a team that needed to beat you to play in a damn bowl game. Get out of here with that comments. The thought that they belong in the field of 12 with a chance to go win a national championship, having lost 2 games to teams that are 6-6, is comedy to me. Their wins were great, and their wins are why they're in front of Miami and why they're in front of Ole Miss and why they're in front of South Carolina. That's why they are where they are. SMU is where they are is because they have 2 losses. Yes, they do. One was a tight one to a BYU squad who was on top of the Big 12 for much of the season, and they end up in the top 20. The other one is to a Clemson team who, look, it was in the conference championship game. So, no, the committee got it exactly right. Alabama had absolutely no business doing that. Plus, the precedent that you discussed, that precedent would have been a dreadful decision from the committee. If they penalized SMU and knocked them out of the playoff for playing in and losing a tight contest with Clemson in a conference championship game after being definitively in, make no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They were the 8th ranked team in America before the college football playoff reveal, before the ACC championship game. They were definitively in it then. What would have changed over 1 week to knock them out? I'll tell you, not a damn thing. Alabama was sitting at home. Alabama had no business getting the benefit of the doubt in this one. I understand it if they have 2 losses. Fine. That's a different discussion, a different argument entirely. That 3rd loss to Oklahoma was the backbreaker, period. You lost in that fashion. You didn't score an offensive touchdown. Hell, you scored 3 points. That was disgusting, a despicable affair from Alabama. They had absolutely no business. I feel very strongly about it. They made the exact right decision. But let's move into did you want to say anything about what I just said? About my diatribe, I guess.
Well, no, look, I just I don't know if it's the committee's job to keep the significance and importance of conference championship games, but that's what they did here. Excuse me, they minimized the risk while still maximizing reward of conference championship games. Yeah. They may change things up and they may go against the precedent they've set next year. I still think it was an important decision to make, especially when it's not like an obvious wrong decision. And I'm not saying it's a wrong decision, but like there would have been other situations where like certainly it would have been the wrong decision to keep SMU in. But this wasn't that. And so I thought it was important they did.
Yeah. And look, it was a good decision. It was the right decision. And I think that
let's start here. I do want to ask you this, and then I have a little story as well.
Go ahead. I love story time.
So they do keep SMU in, and we've talked about our feelings on that. Did you actually think the committee was going to?
I was about 70% sure they would. After the way the game ended. After the way the game ended, I thought I was about 70%.
And I think that probably is important too. I think if they lose by 21 and not a 50-plus yard field goal at the end, maybe that is a different discussion, and maybe that's too small a metric, but whatever. I was not as positive that they were going to make this decision. So I am listening to the selection show in my car. I'm on the road and I'm listening to it. And like, it was just one of those weird visceral reactions. My dad had texted me, "Hey, is SMU in? What's going on?" Yeah. And they're doing the thing and they don't announce it. They do it, with the graphic on the show.
Yeah.
And so I'm 10-2. Well, not really, but for the purpose of this story, just in case there's any popo
for the record, if there are any cops watching,
I'm driving 10-2, and they announce SMU. I take both of my hands off the wheels and like give like a quick clap. Like I was, and I didn't plan on doing it. It was just like a visceral, guttural, like emotional response to like, man, I'm really happy that's the decision they went with. I was not anywhere close to as confident as you were that that's the decision they were going to go with. And so I was overjoyed that it ultimately was.
Yeah, it was the right decision. And look, and anybody who wants to sit out there and call us Alabama haters, that's not what this is.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
Like, we're not Alabama haters. I don't give a damn about Alabama. It could have been Alabama. It could have been Ole Miss. It could have been anybody. It could have been Texas. It could have been USC for all I care. It doesn't matter. Once you lost that third game, I felt like that's effectively a backbreaker, barring unique circumstances. Like if Georgia had lost the SEC title game, that's a unique circumstance. If I don't know, I don't want to go too deep into this, but look, you get the third loss in the regular season to a 6-6 team. Sorry, I mean that's I can't really defend that anymore. And that's really all there is to it, to me, at least. And I don't hate Alabama. I don't care who it is. It's just, I felt like SMU had done more in their regular season. They won the games in front of them. They can't control who they play most of the time in conference. They can't control that fact. All they can do is control what they do on the field, and that's what they did. They won. They didn't lose to 500 teams. They didn't lose to 6-6 teams who were lucky to go to a bowl game. So that's the different conversation. Let's go into and check out these bowl matchups. So number one team in America, of course, that's going to be Oregon. Number 2 is Georgia. Number 3 ends up being Boise State. Number 4 is Arizona State. These are seedings, not where they were ranked. I'm not going to get into the rankings because they don't matter anymore. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are your 4 teams that are going to be getting buys. I'm going to go through this too, and I'm going to say the matchups, and I want you to give me a quick thought on each of them. First one up here, 12 versus 5. It is Clemson on the road at Texas. What are your thoughts on that one really quickly?
A lot of orange in the building. That's my first thought. If we're going to be honest, it's going to come down to the quarterback play. I thought Cade Klubnik was outstanding in the win against SMU. Can he repeat that? And what's the status of Phil Maffa? Because I think Texas is going to bring it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be very interesting in that game. Texas is going to have a point to prove, and Clemson, it just depends on which Clemson shows up. So we will see in that one. That should be, like you said, a lot of orange. Maybe a Clemson takeover. I'm just kidding. We'll see what ends up happening in that one. Speaking of orange and UT, Tennessee is the 9 seed. They're going to be going on the road to the Horseshoe to take on Ohio State. Actually, Kirk Herbstreit had a very interesting comment about this game. He says if he were Ohio State, and as a former Buckeye, I think this is especially interesting. They would have preferred to go on the road and play in Neyland Stadium because the pressure of playing in front of that crowd just after losing to Michigan in the way that they did, getting booed off the field basically. And if they start slow against Tennessee, it might get very, very testy there for the Buckeyes. But it is Tennessee and it is Ohio State. This one is it's got a lot of juice. It's got a lot of juice. Plus, it's also an 8:00 game. So it's a night game for the first time in really forever for Ohio State.
Yeah, the question for me is, can Tennessee replicate what Michigan did? I mean, they've got as good, if not a better, defensive front as Michigan. They need to be getting after Ohio State and see if that offensive line can hold up. The one thing I do feel comfortable saying, Tennessee does not want this turning into a shootout.
No, I don't think
they can keep pace.
Yeah, but this is going to be a bit different kind of test for Ohio State. I think it makes for a really compelling matchup, though. SMU, like I mentioned, they are on the road taking on Penn State, a Dallas team going up into the Great White North of Penn State and Happy Valley. This is an interesting game. I think that it's a Jennings game, but if Penn State plays that offensive style that they did against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, then I think Penn State should have like its chances.
Well, look, I know SMU lost, but we talked about it. The SMU run defense has been outstanding this year, and it was good against Clemson. It wasn't the run game that got you beat. And so you're coming off of Penn State's best rushing performance probably this season, at least as far as you and I are concerned. I think that's the key matchup. I think Penn State defensively, they got to find a way to get better because I think SMU can cut you up the way that Oregon did to an extent. So this one's going to be interesting to see if it trends towards higher scoring affair or lower scoring affair.
Yeah, look, they allowed 95 yards on the ground per game. We talked about that in the build-up to the ACC championship game. That is the matchup to watch here. Then you got two Indiana squads. Number 10, Indiana, down in South Bend, Indiana. Number 7, Notre Dame. That one's going to be 8:00 on ABC. That one is going to be so cool because it's two Indiana squads, two teams who Indiana really hasn't been worrisome for Notre Dame. Notre Dame has kind of dominated that state, and I know that's your alma mater, so I'll let you speak a little bit more about that. But Indiana just feels like they've drifted out of the thought process here. Nobody mentioned anything with Indiana. They were kind of shoot in. They were the I don't know, I guess the heel of everything after losing to Ohio State, and then how quickly things changed. And they don't have to go very far, just up the road to South Bend, Indiana for their first round matchup.
Yeah, I mean, look, out of the, let's say 35 states that have 2 FBS programs that have any realistic potential to get into the playoffs, I'm not sure I had a in-state matchup from Indiana being the one. You could have sold me on Georgia Tech, Texas A&M, Texas SMU, Michigan State. You could sell me. I mean, USC. You can go. Indiana's going to be way down the list, but that's exactly what we get.
Yep.
This one's really interesting. Notre Dame is going to try and run the ball and play defense, and I actually think it's a solid matchup for Indiana. I'm not saying an advantageous matchup. But I think it is a pretty good matchup for Indiana. I think there are other teams in this group of 12 that would have given them much more problems. And again, I'm not saying Notre Dame won't give them problems, but I think it's a decent matchup that Indiana is going to take. I think Indiana feels comfortable that they can stop the run. I think that's going to give them an opportunity, and they think they can score. Notre Dame thinks they can stop. It's a passing offense for Indiana. It's a really good secondary for Notre Dame. It is a fascinating matchup. And honestly, it might be the most competitive of these first round games.
Yeah, I think so. And speaking of competitive, it's not very competitive, at least if you look at the spreads. Indiana, Notre Dame is an 8-point favorite in South Bend. SMU, Penn State is an 8.5-point favorite. Ohio State, Tennessee, home Buckeyes, 7.5-point favorites in that one. In Texas is an 11-point favorite over the Clemson Tigers. Point spreads don't determine football games. The football players do. So I think that's going to be really interesting. I'm very excited for these on-campus matchups. These atmospheres are going to be spectacular. And I really wish that Tennessee was the home team. That's really my biggest, I guess my only qualm there. I felt like Tennessee should have been hosting Ohio State, not vice versa. But what can you do? What can you do there? But I do want to talk last thing here. Oregon got penalized, I think, a little bit too hard. And this is one of the things that I want to see change in the future whenever they get into this. First and foremost, I think they need to reseed when they move forward, and they need to be able to play the whatever lowest seed actually wins out of the first round, right? I think that's where Oregon needs to. It kind of got screwed in that regard. But you're the only undefeated team in America. You are the Big Ten champion. You're the number one team in the country. You get the first round bye. Great job. Now you get to play the winner of Tennessee and Ohio State. Woof. Those are two of the best teams in the country. And last time Ohio State was up in Autzen, they nearly won that football game. Great. Well, now you get the winner of that game, Tennessee and Ohio State. If you win that one, then you might get Texas in the semifinal. And then when you get to a national championship game, good for you. You might get Georgia now. It's a brutal draw for the Ducks. But then you look at what the Dogs have as the number 2 seed. They would get the winner of Indiana and Notre Dame. Those are two good football teams, but I think those are two teams that Georgia feels pretty comfortable that they'd be able to beat. And then outside of that is Penn State and SMU. Then it's Boise State. So you look at the imbalance, but in this schedule, and that's where I kind of have some qualms with what we see here. It's the fact that you have 4 automatic bids, or 5 automatic bids, right? But you have the top 4 teams that are conference champions getting those buys, and then they're seeded 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not going to make for a very balanced bracket. That's where I don't think that the committee or whoever was planning all of this, the college football playoff, back when they did this expansion, I know you have to appease the conferences. I know you have to deal with all that stuff, but Boise State getting a bye here, and I think that kind of threw everything for a loop. Arizona State getting a bye, I think it throws everything for a loop. I understand why it happens again, but it makes for imbalanced brackets when it's all said and done. And Oregon is getting the short end of the stick, and Georgia's really getting a cakewalk by relative measure, right? And I don't know if there's a perfect way to do this where you can check off every box and appease every party. But Oregon's got to be pretty pissed off about their route to a college football playoff.
Yeah. I mean, look, I heard a couple people mention it, and no one's given a real suggestion beyond the fact that, all right, no automatic bids for conference champs, or you get automatic bids, but not necessarily the bye, and you just rank the teams. But we're talking about trying to win a national championship, man. Like, yeah, the path isn't going to be easy. Beat the team in front of you. You're supposed to be the best team in the country. Stop complaining. You haven't even played the game yet, man. Like, you may dominate Tennessee or Ohio State.
You may.
Like, you may dominate Arizona State or whoever. I don't know why we're trying to make up a controversy before we
No
play that
controversy
game.
here. No controversy. I'm just making a point.
I also think like, and I use this, and maybe you call it an excuse, whatever. I say it a lot. Like, I also don't think we need to make like crazy overreactions to a 1-year sample size because
No,
it is the
yeah,
first year.
I hear what you're saying.
And things may work out differently next year where Georgia has a much tougher path as a 2 seed and BYU or whatever. It just, it's tough to say, but
Yeah.
I understand. The only real suggestion would be, all right, you win your conference championship, you get a bid, but you don't automatically get a bye. We're just going to sort the teams and the top 4 get buys. And maybe that's a little bit more fair, but like, I don't know, like Texas and Ohio State, would either of them have been in the top 4 anyways? I mean, maybe Texas, I guess.
Well, your top 4 would have been, I think, what it ended up being. It would have been
Texas and Penn State?
Texas, Penn State, Georgia, and Oregon. That was going to be your top 4, just
So-
based off of
so-
the way they seeded.
All right, so Ohio State's the 5 seed. Like,
Yeah.
They still would have had to face off. I just
Yeah, but then they're the 5 seed and not the 8 seed. Did you see what I'm saying? Like it's
Yeah,
there.
but, like,
There are little
whatever.
things in this that I feel like you just need to rank the teams as they are, and they just so be it. You know,
Look, you're going to
Rank
have
the
to
teams
run
as they are.
through. You play whoever's in front of you. Like I don't know.
Yeah,
I
but
just
the thing
don't
is,
buy
yeah,
this.
I get the fact that you're gonna have to beat some of these teams if you want to win a national championship, but that's not the point. It's the fact that for some reason you've got Ohio State, who's the 5th ranked team in the country, but now all of a sudden they're number 8, and then that throws off the balance of a bracket, and it defeats the whole point of seeding teams. It's just weird the way it all comes out, and I just don't like the way that the bids push their way, and it throws off the competitive balance of a bracket, which is the whole point of having you face the lower seed, and supposedly that's going to be a different type of team that you face, a lesser than quote unquote opponent. But that's not the case. There are 9 seeds, 8 seeds that I would take 10 times out of 10 over 3 seeds and 4 seeds. So I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. That's all I'm trying to say. And it doesn't like you get a bye, fine, but it's like I also think that you need to be able to choose your opponent. Perhaps I think that would be an interesting way of, appeasing as many parties as possible. If you're Oregon, you're the number 1 team in America. I'm going to go play in the Rose Bowl, and I'm going to choose which opponent I play. And I choose Arizona State, or I choose Clemson. I choose anybody. It doesn't matter who they end up choosing. They could choose anybody they want, and then it goes down that way. Does that make sense? I think that could be an interesting way to do it.
People have suggested the choosing your opponent crap. It's never
it won't do it. They won't do that.
It's not like it's just not going to work out the way you think it is.
It never does.
Just
You made a good point. You don't want to overreact to a small sample size, but this is something that I've kind of seen the writing on the wall for this for a little while, where you're talking about a 5 seed being a better seed than the 1 seed. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like why would you open the door?
That's gonna. Here's the problem: is the premise is like there's a way around it, and there's not. Like they're at no point are they just gonna seed teams based strictly on the records, right? So they're always gonna still seed teams based on records, not who they actually think is the best team. In no world would they have seeded it the way that people are pretending it would have made sense. Like you're just not going to find ways to easy up the path. Like
I'm not talking about easing up the path as much as it is.
That is what you're talking about.
I'm talking about being an equitable path. I mean, the one that makes sense. It doesn't make sense.
It's never going to make sense on a year-to-year basis. You're always going to have. Sometimes there's only going to be 3 teams that can win the national championship. Sometimes there's going to be 7 teams that win the national championship or have the capabilities of winning the national championship. Like, I just don't think it's realistic to think you can find some sort of format that's necessarily going to work out in that manner. Are there ways you can improve it? Potentially. But again, that's going to require removing automatic buys for conference champions.
Yep. And that's all I want to do. I think the 4 highest teams should get buys, and the rest of it, figure it out. Get into the dance and figure it out from there. But look, this is the format that we have. This is the format that we're going to watch. And I think it's a format that we're all going to really enjoy. It's going to make for a very compelling final, month and a half or so of college football. All the more reason to give us a follow at GChapATL, at Abe Gordon. I already predicted the playoff bracket completely. So maybe I have some other takes on there that you might want to follow up on. Give me a follow at GChapATL, at Abe Gordon as well. Thank you so much for watching. Whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on Spotify, anywhere, on Twitter, We're doing a live over there. If anybody wants to give us a follow, it'd be great. Follow along as we talk all things college football. Appreciate all of you for tuning in. It was a fantastic final week of action in the regular season. And next up, we got Army and Navy coming up at the end of this week. And then there's more discussion on the college football playoff, and the bowl schedule is here. It's time for postseason ball in the college football world. So we will continue to break all that down right here. For Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. Thank you so much for watching or listening. We will see you again very soon as we get into the college football playoff. Thanks so much.